Under God's wings, where fear ends and faith begins. Psalm 91:4. Introduction. The shelter of his wings. There are days when the soul grows so weary, it no longer knows where to find peace. The world outside feels too loud, too fast, and too heavy, with the winds of worry, fear, and uncertainty. We try to be strong, to stand tall, yet somewhere deep inside, something trembles, something fragile and tired longs to be held, to be covered, to be safe. Amid all the shelters we build for ourselves, success, people, possessions, there remains only one true place of rest, under the wings of God. Scripture says, He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. Psalm 91:4. It seems like a simple verse, yet within it lies an entire universe of tenderness and power. Under His wings, those words sound like a lullaby for frightened souls, a gentle whisper in the darkness that says, you are still loved, you are still protected, you are still safe. When the storms of life rage, God doesn't always silence them. Instead, He spreads His wings and covers us, so that even when the rain still falls and the winds still howl, our hearts can rest knowing that we are not alone. His wings are the symbol of unconditional love, a love that sees our weakness and still chooses to surround us with mercy. Beneath that shadow, fear loses its voice, and only peace remains, the quiet kind of peace, where faith begins to breathe again after being suffocated by worry. Imagine this. Beneath a gray and trembling sky, a small bird shivers in its nest as the wind howls through the trees. Then the mother bird spreads her warm wings and covers it completely. The storm still rages outside, but beneath those wings there is warmth, there is safety, there is life. That is the picture Psalm 91 paints, not of a distant God, but of a loving Father who bends down and covers us with His own wings. Maybe right now, you too are carrying a storm inside your heart. Fears about the future, wounds that haven't healed, or an emptiness you cannot name. And in the middle of it all, God is whispering, come, my child, hide beneath my wings, not to escape the world, but to learn how to see it from within His peace. Under His wings, you are not cut off from reality. You are embraced by grace, healed in love, and prepared to walk back into life with renewed strength. Fear doesn't disappear because we ignore it. It fades when we begin to see it through the light of faith. Every time we choose to trust God instead of letting fear lead us, we take one more step out of the darkness. And in that sacred space where fear ends and faith begins, His wings open wider, silently covering us with unwavering faithfulness. This journey, under God's wings, where fear ends and faith begins, is not a story of human strength. It is an invitation to a different reality. A place where peace is not the absence of storms, but the presence of God. Together, we will discover how to truly dwell beneath His wings, not just to know about His protection, but to feel it, breathe it, and live from it every single day. Because under His wings the storm may still roar, but your heart will no longer tremble. Under His wings the world may keep spinning, but your soul will remain still. Under His wings you no longer have to fight for control, for you are already held, already loved, already safe. There, fear ends, and faith begins to rise, like the first light of dawn after the longest night. Part 1. The shelter of His wings. A refuge for the weary. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot cure, a heaviness that sits quietly in the soul, deeper than the body's exhaustion. It is the kind of weariness that comes from carrying invisible burdens, from pretending to be strong for too long, from standing against storms you never asked to face. Sometimes, you wake up and realize that the armor you once wore so proudly has become too heavy to carry, that your heart has forgotten how to rest. You look around, searching for a safe place, not to escape life, but to breathe again, to remember who you are beneath the noise. And then, somewhere in that search, you feel a whisper, not outside, but within, a whisper that says, come and rest under my wings. There is something sacred about those words. something so tender that it breaks through the hardest shells of our hearts. For all our striving, all our running, all our endless attempts to be enough, God offers something completely different. Not performance, not perfection, but presence. His presence. The warmth of his wings is not earned. It is offered. His covering is not for the flawless, but for the fragile. Under his wings, the weary find refuge. That word, refuge, means so much more than shelter. It means a home for the broken, a place of belonging for the displaced, a sanctuary where tears are not wasted, but transformed. Refuge is not an escape. It is a return to the truth that you were never meant to carry the weight of the world alone. The world teaches us to fight harder, to stand taller, to be unshaken. But grace teaches us something far gentler, that sometimes the holiest thing you can do is fall into his arms, fall into trust, fall into rest, because the one who holds you does not grow weary. His strength is not diminished by your weakness. Imagine, for a moment, a child caught in a thunderstorm. The sky cracks open, the rain pours down, and the wind howls through the trees. The child runs, terrified, until he finds his mother. She kneels, opens her arms, and wraps him close beneath her coat. The storm doesn't stop, but in that embrace, fear loses its power. The child's heart slows, his trembling fades, and even though the rain still falls, he is no longer afraid. That is what it means to rest under the wings of God. The psalmist didn't write Psalm 91 from comfort, but from chaos. Those verses were not born in silence, but in struggle. When David spoke of being hidden under the shadow of God's wings, he was hiding in caves, running from enemies, surrounded by darkness. Yet he discovered something the world could never take away, the peace that exists not after the storm but within it. There is a sacred calm that only comes when we surrender, not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of trust, when we finally stop fighting to control everything, allow God to hold us instead. Fear says, you must hold it all together. Faith whispers, you don't have to, I will. It whispers, you don't have to, I will. Perhaps you have been running for a long time. From pain, from disappointment, from yourself. You've built walls so high that even light struggles to enter, but walls may keep danger out. They also keep healing away. God does not promise to protect you behind your walls. He invites you to step out and come under his wing. There, you will not be hidden by stone or pride, but by love. His wings are not fragile feathers. They are the unshakable presence of his faithfulness. When he covers you, he doesn't hide you from life. He holds you through it. His protection is not about removing the storm. It's about giving you peace inside it. The winds may rage, but the wings remain. And the one who hides beneath them learns that safety is not the absence of danger, but the presence of God. When you rest beneath his wings, you begin to see differently. You start to realize that what once felt like the end was only the beginning of something holy. The pain that once defined you becomes the soil where your faith begins to grow. The tears you thought were wasted become the rain that softens the ground of your heart. Under his wings, even your scars find meaning, for there, every wound is touched by healing hands. Sometimes, the gentlest miracles are the ones no one sees, the quiet renewal of a heart that has learned to trust again. No lightnings, no thunder, just a stillness so pure that it hums with divine peace. That stillness is the language of his wings. And in that stillness, fear begins to dissolve. You don't have to force it away. It simply cannot survive in the warmth of perfect love. For love, his love, casts out fear, not by shouting over it, but by embracing you until fear loses its hold. God's wings are not a metaphor to be admired. They are a reality to be experienced. When you close your eyes and breathe his name, Lord, cover me, something changes. The noise fades. The shadows lose their weight. The heart, once trembling, begins to steady. And in that holy quiet you realize peace is not a place you find. It is a person you rest in. Even now, as you listen, Maybe you can sense it, that gentle invitation that has always been there. Come, my child. The storm will not destroy you. Let me cover you until the rain passes. Let me teach your heart how to rest. This is not the kind of refuge the world understands. It is not built of walls or doors, but of grace. It is not guarded by force, but by faithfulness. And it is always open for the weary, the wounded, the fearful, and the lost. Under his wings, you don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to hide your tears. You don't have to pretend to be brave. You are free to just be, fully seen, fully known, fully loved. The Almighty bends low to meet you where you are. And in that meeting, everything changes. If you listen closely, you might hear it. The sound of feathers brushing against the wind. The soft pulse of divine heartbeat whispering through eternity. You are safe. You are mine. Rest now. And as you yield, slowly, gently, completely, the weight begins to lift. The storm still hums in the distance. But inside, something new begins to bloom. Faith, hope, peace. They rise quietly, like dawn over the waters. For beneath his wings, you have found not only safety, you have found home. Part 2, Under his wings, where fear becomes shelter. Fear has its own language. It doesn't need words, yet it echoes through the mind like a cold wind slipping through the cracks of the heart. It whispers in the dark. What if everything falls apart? What if I'm not enough? What if no one comes to help me? Those quiet questions, persistent and subtle, drip like water onto the soul until peace wears thin. Fear doesn't shout, it lingers. It knows how to gnaw away at hope, one breath at a time, until we can no longer recognize the voice of faith. Every one of us has heard that voice, maybe in the stillness of midnight, when the world sleeps and only your thoughts remain. Maybe at a crossroads, when the future looks blurred and your heart trembles beneath the weight of choice. Maybe in moments of loss, when life slips beyond your control and you realize how small you are. Fear wears many faces: doubt, disappointment, loneliness. But its root is always the same. We forget that God is still here. Fear exaggerates reality. Faith restores it. Fear focuses on what might be lost. Faith reminds us of the one who never changes. And sometimes God allows fear to speak, not to punish us, but so we can learn to recognize which voice is true. There are days when fear speaks louder than anything else. But the wonder of grace is this: God never yells to compete. He whispers. His voice doesn't crash through the storm. It calls softly from within it. He doesn't say, "Do not fear," as a command to obey, but as a tender comfort. My child, don't be afraid. I'm right here. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the rest found in the midst of fear. It does not deny the storm. It stands firm within it, knowing that the arms of God are still wrapped around us. Some of the holiest lessons are written not in ease but in tears, and resting in God is one of them. Fear doesn't disappear because we want it gone. It fades when we choose to trust. Trust isn't an emotion, it's a decision. Every time fear rises, we have a choice to stand in the shadows of worry or in the light of his promise. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hebrews 13:5. Think of your soul as a still lake. When fear blows across it, the surface ripples and the reflection of the sky distorts. But when the wind quiets, when your heart returns to God's presence, the waters settle and you can see the heavens again. Faith doesn't create a new sky. It helps you see the one that's always been there. Many believe that having faith means never feeling afraid. But faith doesn't erase fear. It redefines how we face it. The faithful still hear the thunder, still feel the shaking. Yet they know that beyond the clouds the sun still burns. God's wings are still spread, even when we can't see them. Jesus once slept through a storm. Mark 4:39. Not because he couldn't hear the waves, but because he knew who commanded the sea. That sleep was not indifference. It was absolute trust. When he rose and calmed the waters, it wasn't just to show his power. It was to teach us that peace is not found when the storm stops, but when we realize he's in the boat. We can't control the wind, but we can choose where to anchor our hearts. And when our hearts are anchored in Him, no storm, however fierce, can sink us. Fear says, "You're alone." Faith answers, "You never were." Fear says, "Everything is falling apart." Faith replies, "Nothing is beyond His hands." Fear says, "You are not enough." Faith smiles and says, "He is enough for you." When we learn to rest in God, we no longer need to understand everything. We don't need to know what tomorrow holds, only who walks beside us today. That is what the world cannot grasp. True peace is not when life makes sense, but when the heart is held steady in His presence. God never promised to remove every storm, but He did promise to be with us in every one of them. Grace often arrives not in blinding light, but in quiet warmth, that unexplainable moment, when even in trembling, you feel surrounded by something gentle, invisible, yet real. That something is Him. You can't see it, but once you've felt it, you'll never forget. When we sit still in His presence, something strange happens. The things that once terrified us begin to lose their power. Not because they've vanished, but because we now see them through His light. Fear grows smaller. God grows larger. Faith doesn't come from seeing the outcome. It comes from seeing God in the process. The road may still be rough, but when He walks before you, every step becomes sure. The future may remain uncertain, but if His hand is holding yours, then even the faintest light is enough to guide you through the dark. Resting in God is not passive. It is the strength of surrender. It is the holy moment when we stop fighting, stop striving, stop pretending to be strong, and simply trust. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know you'll be there. If fear is the rain, faith is the shelter. The quiet awning beneath which you sit, watching the drops fall while your heart stays calm. The storm doesn't need to stop, only your panic does. And when it does, it's not because everything has changed, it's because you finally know who holds you in the storm. Maybe today you're surrounded by noise, by worry, by hundreds of unanswered questions. Stop for a moment, breathe, whisper softly, "Lord, help me rest in you." You'll find that peace doesn't always come with thunder or light. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet breeze that brushes past and tells your heart, He is here. And then fear, once so loud, becomes only a visitor, knocking, but never entering, because your heart already has an owner, and His name is peace. Learning to rest in God's presence is learning how to live again, to know that even when the wind blows, His hand still holds yours. It is daring to breathe, daring to be still, daring to be weak, for in stillness, He is still working. It is to let Him teach you how to sleep through storms, as He once did, knowing no wave can ever drown the hands that form the sea. And so in the midst of the wind's howl, you begin to hear something only the resting heart can hear. The steady rhythm of His breath, the heartbeat of heaven, whispering gently to your soul, "Peace, my child, I am still here." Part 3. The faith that rises from the shadow. There are things that can only grow in the dark. A seed cannot rise beneath blazing light. It must first be buried in the soil, hidden, silent, unseen, surrounded by warmth, patience, and time. Faith is born in the same way. It is not shaped in comfort, but in struggle. Not in laughter, but in tears. Not in applause, but in the quiet breath of a soul, whispering through the night, "Lord, stay with me." The darkness of life is not the absence of God. It is the very place where He works the deepest. He does not always come with thunder or miracles, but with a quiet presence that seeps into the cracks of the heart. When the outer light fades, He teaches us to see the inner one, the steady glow that never dies, because it comes from Him. And in that glow, faith begins to rise, not in triumph, but in trust, not loud, not spectacular, but steady as a flame that keeps burning in the wind. When we rest under His wings, we find peace in His protection. Yet there comes a time when He gently folds those wings just enough for us to stand, not because He withdraws His love, but because He wants us to learn how to believe. Like a young bird once sheltered in the nest, there comes a day when it must spread its wings and meet the sky. And so God allows the wind to blow, not to make us fall, but to teach us that his hands still hold us, even when we think we're falling. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the courage to walk through fear. It is not seeing the whole path, but knowing the one who leads. God never asks us to be strong. He only asks us to be honest. He doesn't seek perfect faith, only genuine faith. The kind that trembles but still whispers his name. For he knows that true strength is born not from willpower, but from surrender. And sometimes the most beautiful prayer is not a bold declaration, but a soft cry. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Mark 9:24. Real faith does not grow in moments of victory, but in the waiting, in the prayers that linger unanswered, in the silence that stretches too long, in the emptiness that feels unbearable. Yet it is in that waiting that faith is refined. Like gold in fire, purer, brighter, and truer. God's silence is not absence. It is a deeper form of presence. When he stops speaking, he is teaching us to hear differently. He wants us to trust not because we feel him, but because we know him. Faith is not a fleeting emotion. It is a daily decision. Each morning when the sun rises and nothing seems to change, faith quietly says, "You are still here," and that small whisper carries enough power to push back the darkness. Jesus once said, "If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains." He didn't say that to measure faith, but to show that size doesn't matter, only placement. A mustard seed in God's hands can shake the earth. True faith may look small, but it is filled with eternity. Faith doesn't erase pain. It gives us strength to walk through it without breaking. It doesn't keep loss away. It transforms loss into something sacred. It doesn't hide the tears. It turns them into seeds of hope, planted deep in the soil of grace, until one day they bloom into joy. Faith doesn't promise we'll never fall. It promises that when we do, a hand will always reach down to lift us up. There are moments when God teaches through distance. He steps back, not to abandon us, but to help us discover that even when we cannot see him, he is still holding the world steady. He lets the waves rise so we'll remember that the ocean itself obeys him. He allows the night to linger so we can learn that the light never leaves. It just waits for our eyes to open. Faith is walking in darkness with light enough for one step, not the whole path, just one step, enough to move forward. And as we take that step, the next one becomes clear, and the next after that, one breath, one step, one whisper of trust at a time. And we realize that faith is not about seeing the way, it's about walking with the one who is the way. Faith doesn't always blaze like fire. Sometimes it flickers like a candle in the wind, but here lies the miracle. God never extinguishes it. He cups his hands around the small flame, shielding it from the gusts, protecting it until it grows again. Faith is not an act of the moment. It is the breath of a lifetime. It lives not only in prayer, but in every small choice, in kindness offered when weary, in forgiveness given through tears, in hope held on to when everything else falls apart. Faith stays when feelings fade, when logic fails, when nothing makes sense, because it is not built on emotion, but on relationship. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize the nights you thought would break you were the nights your faith was born. Faith was never built from miracles. It was built from every yes whispered in the dark. Each yes opened the sky a little more. Each step brought a beam of light through the cracks. A soft wind brushed your face, and you heard it, that gentle voice saying, "You are not alone." So if today you find yourself in the dark, if heaven feels silent, if fear surrounds you, don't despair. The silence of God is not distance. It is the invitation for your faith to grow. Don't rush. Don't run. Breathe. Lift your eyes. Whisper, "I still believe," and heaven will move. Because faith does not have to be perfect. It only has to be real. And sometimes, even the smallest flicker of faith, as light as a breath, is enough to open the whole sky. Part 4. From Fear to Faith. The transformation within. Some storms don't rage outside of us. They rise quietly within. They come without thunder or lightning, yet their winds can shake the soul. These storms aren't seen in the sky. They move in the hidden chambers of the heart. Waves of worry, doubt, and the fear of being forgotten. They don't destroy the body. They unsettle the spirit. And in the middle of those unseen tempests, God doesn't always come with thunder. He comes as a whisper, "Do not be afraid." Not because the storm has ended, but because He is in it. And it is there, right there in the heart of the wind, that the miracle begins. Fear doesn't vanish. It transforms. It becomes the soil from which faith begins to grow. Faith is not born in safety. It is born in fragility. It doesn't bloom on the mountaintop, but in the valley where everything else has fallen away, where the only thing left to hold is the invisible hand of God. That is why faith is not given as a completed gift. It is forged through the breaking, the waiting, the weeping. As children, we were afraid of the dark. But as we grow, we learn that not every darkness is empty. Some darkness holds the very presence of God. In that sacred obscurity, He teaches us to trust even when we cannot see. That is the first breath of true faith. Not believing because the light is bright, but believing when only a small flicker remains in the night. There are days when God feels distant, when prayer seems to echo without reply. Yet in that silence, faith is forming, like a seed sprouting beneath the soil, unseen but alive. Growth is never loud. It happens quietly, beneath the surface. Faith doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with the calm assurance that He is still faithful, even when you see nothing at all. Faith doesn't erase fear. It puts it in its proper place. Fear is human. Faith is divine. Fear says this is impossible. Faith answers with God. All things are possible. Fear makes you shrink back. Faith calls you forward. Fear looks at the waves. Faith looks at the one standing above them. Remember Peter, the disciple who stepped out of the boat when he saw Jesus walking on the water. For a moment, his feet met the impossible. As long as his eyes were on Christ, he stood firm. But the instant he looked at the storm, he began to sink. That story isn't about failure. It's a mirror showing us that where we fix our gaze determines where we place our trust. If you look at fear, you will be swallowed by it. If you look at God, faith will carry you above the waves. Jesus didn't wait for Peter's fear to vanish before reaching out His hand. He grasped it in the trembling. That is the heart of faith. It doesn't demand strength. It asks for honesty. Many think faith is a fierce emotion, courage that never flinches. But faith doesn't deny weakness. It places weakness into the hands of the Almighty. Faith says, "Lord, I don't understand. I'm still afraid, but I choose to trust You." And that single sentence, whispered through trembling lips, can move mountains in the soul. As long as we cling to fear, we cannot soar. But when we dare to release it, when we let go and fall into grace, faith spreads its wing, like an eagle pushing her young from the nest, not to harm but to teach them they were born to fly. God sometimes allows us to fall, not to break us, but to show us that faith can lift us higher than fear ever could. Every step of faith is a quiet victory. No crowds, no applause, just a soul walking through the night, smiling softly because it knows the ground beneath is not sand but promise. Faith is not believing that God can, it is resting in the truth that He will, in His time and in His way. It is the peace of knowing that even when the sea is wild, He still holds the helm. Faith is a small light, not enough to see the whole road, but enough for the next step. And with each step, dawn comes closer. Fear will try to return, that is its nature. But every time it whispers, you can remind it of what has already been overcome. You no longer own me. Faith has taken your place. And slowly the voice of fear fades, while the voice of faith grows steady, familiar, deep, and constant, like the heartbeat of grace. Faith is not a burst of emotion. It is a daily decision. It's the choice to trust when you wake, to rest when you're weary, to pray when you're silent, to believe when you see nothing. Faith whispers, He is still here, and that whisper becomes the anchor that keeps your soul from drifting in the storm. Faith is born in darkness, but blooms in light. It begins with trembling but ends with peace. It doesn't change the reality around you. It changes the way you see it, bathing it in the light of heaven. Perhaps you are in a season of transition, where fear and faith coexist within you. Don't despise the fear. Let it drive you closer to God, because when we are weakest, we discover the one who is strong within us. Faith is born not from ease, but from God's touch in the moments we thought were hopeless. When you choose faith over fear, you change the trajectory of your life. For faith doesn't merely calm fear, it transforms fear into fire. The very places that once terrified you become the altars where you now see the glory of God. Faith makes the heart light, like one who has finally found home after wandering far too long. It doesn't promise that life will be easy. It promises that you will never walk alone. Each time you choose to believe, heaven opens a little wider. Sometimes a flicker of faith is enough to change an entire sky. Faith isn't the light that erases the night. It's the lamp that lets you walk through it. When you walk by faith, you declare to the darkness, "You no longer define me." And at the end of that long road, when morning breaks, you'll realize that it was the night itself that taught you how to see. So don't be afraid when fear still lingers in your heart. Let it become a quiet teacher, leading you toward the refuge of faith. Let it remind you that you still need God, and that need is the beginning of a miracle. One day, you'll look back on the tears, the sleepless nights, the trembling prayers, and you will smile, because you'll see that every fragile moment was used by God to shape a faith that is stronger, gentler, and far more beautiful. The journey from fear to faith is not a straight path, it's a transformation. And along the way, every gust of wind, every scar, every weakness becomes a witness to the steadfast love of God. Then, when all the voices of fear are finally silent, your soul will stand still, breathing slowly, and you'll hear, clear and close, the whisper of God within you. "My child, you have come through the storm. Now rest, your faith has grown." And in that light you'll know, you haven't merely survived fear, you've been transformed. Part 5. Dwelling in peace. The calm beneath his wings. There is a kind of peace that does not come from calm surroundings, but from a heart that has found its resting place. It is not the silence around us, but the stillness within us, that sacred space where the winds of worry lose their strength. True peace is not found when life stops storming, but when we learn how to rest within the storm, and that place of rest is beneath the wings of God. Peace is not a reward for the flawless. It is a gift for those who dare to trust. It is not the result of control, but the fruit of surrender. The more we hold on, the heavier life becomes. The more we release, the lighter our soul feels. Peace comes when we stop resisting, stop performing, stop trying to fix everything, and finally whisper, "Lord, I place it all in your hands." And in that moment, something miraculous happens. The storm may not stop, but the thunder sounds farther away. The waves may still rise, but the heart no longer trembles. The world remains loud, yet within, a sacred quiet begins to spread, like the soft whisper of heaven breathing through every heartbeat. There are mornings when the first light touches the window, and you realize you are still here, and that alone is a miracle. Not because everything is solved, but because within you there is a peace untouched by the world, a peace that doesn't come from having all the answers, but from knowing who holds the story. God never promised to erase the storm, but he promised to be with us in it. Peace is not found in the absence of trouble, but in the presence of God. Once you understand that, you stop trying to escape the storm and start learning to sit beneath his wings, where the rain becomes nothing more than the rhythm of your faith resting. The peace of God is not a temporary silence. It is the eternal rest of the soul. It does not depend on circumstances, for it flows from the one who never changes. The world says, "You'll have peace when everything is right." But God says, "You'll have peace when you are in me." Many seek peace in success, in people, in control, but all these things are fleeting. True peace cannot come from what can be lost. It can only come from the one who cannot be taken away. Imagine standing by a still lake. The surface is smooth as glass, reflecting the blue of the sky. Then the wind blows, and the reflection distorts. But when the wind dies down, the lake grows calm again, and the sky reappears. So it is with the heart. When fear and worry stir it, we lose sight of God. But when we grow still, when we sit quietly in His presence, His image returns, clear and radiant within us. The stillness of the soul is not the absence of sound, but the presence of trust. It is the moment you stop asking why and simply whisper, I know you're here. This peace doesn't need proof. It only needs to be felt, in breath, in heartbeat, in the soft glow behind your eyes. God did not come to remove us from the world, but to give us peace within it, a peace that cannot be stolen, cannot be bought, cannot be broken. When you have that peace, you have everything, even if you have nothing in your hand. Perhaps you once thought peace was a destination, a place you would reach once life finally settled. But true peace is a companion. It walks beside you, teaching you how to breathe through pressure, how to smile through pain, how to love through loss. It does not take you on shortcuts. It walks with you through the long road, step by step. Peace is not having full understanding. It is trusting that everything is held in His hands. When you begin to see the world through the eyes of faith, you realize nothing is random. Every tear, every delay, every detour carries the fingerprints of God. In the silence of prayer, when every noise fades, the soul begins to hear what could not be heard before. The gentle voice of God, quiet as breath, saying, you belong to me. And when you believe that, everything else loses its power. Worry loses its grip. Time loses its threat. All because the soul has finally found where it belongs. You may have searched for peace in many places. In work, in people, in busyness, only to find it slip away again and again. That's because peace is never found by holding on. It's found by being held, and the hand that holds you bears the marks of love, the scars of the cross. The peace of God is not as bright as fireworks. It's as gentle as candlelight. It doesn't make your heart race. It makes your heart soften. It doesn't come with noise or celebration. It comes in the quiet, when you finally stop striving. God's peace doesn't excite you. It grounds you. It doesn't make you run. It makes you rest. This is the peace the world cannot give, and therefore cannot take. It is not dependent on what happens around you. It is planted within you, like an eternal seed. And even when storms rage, that seed will not be uprooted, because its roots go deep into the love of God. When you live in that peace, you begin to see the world differently. You stop rushing. You stop fearing. You start to see beauty in simple things. A drop of dew on a leaf, a laugh, an embrace, a golden afternoon, because you realize that in every small moment, God is there. Peace in God is like that. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It seeps gently into every breath, every gesture, every thought. It softens the hard edges of the heart and warms the places that once grew cold. It teaches you to love more deeply, to wait more patiently, to live with quiet gratitude. And one day, when you truly understand what it means to live in His peace, you'll see peace is not the final reward. It is the path itself, a soft road paved with grace, leading the soul back home to stillness, to that sacred place beneath His wings, where love hums softly through the air, and weary hearts find rest. And when you sit beneath those wings, listening to the wind pass through the leaves, to time moving gently by, you will realize there is no need to search anymore, because heaven has already begun inside your heart. Part 6. The Eternal Refuge, where the soul finds home. There comes a moment, quiet, still and sacred, when the wind stops blowing, the waves grow calm, and the soul finally understands this journey was never about finding answers. It was about finding home, not a place, but a presence, not walls or shelter, but the embrace of the Almighty. We have walked through fear and night, through waiting and doubt. We have fallen, wept, and questioned. Yet we have also risen, trusted, and kept walking. And now, as dawn breaks beyond the storm, we see it clearly. Everything has been leading us back to Him. Peace is not when the storm ceases. It is when the heart becomes still. Faith is not born in sunlight, but in those long shadowed nights, where all we could offer was a whispered prayer. And now we know His wings were never closed. It was only fear that kept us from realizing they were always there. Here, beneath His wings, the soul finds rest. Every scar, every tear, every unanswered question, they no longer carry pain, but purpose. What once felt like breaking has become proof of grace. The storms are no longer memories of sorrow, but reminders of His presence. Quiet, faithful, unshaken. God never promised a life without storms. He promised that we would never face them alone. And when we finally understand that, fear loses its hold. For where His presence dwells, no shadow can remain. We no longer have to search far and wide. The refuge we've longed for has been here all along, not out there in the world, but within, where He dwells. He is peace when we tremble, light when we're lost, and home when we wander. Now, the soul can breathe again. The battles are over. The questions have grown quiet. There's no need to understand everything, only to rest in the truth that His love still holds, still covers, still remains. And as the sun sets gently on this long journey, we smile, for we've learned that faith is not a destination, but a way of being. It is not victory, but rest, the deep, quiet rest of those who know they are safe in His arms. Under His wings, fear ends, and faith begins. A faith refined by trial, strengthened by silence, and crowned with peace. And in the stillness we hear His whisper, I have covered you with my wings. In my shadow you will always find refuge. And the soul replies, soft and sure, Lord, I'm home. The sky clears. Light settles like a gentle breath. No more tears, no more fear, only everlasting peace beneath His wings. And beneath the wings of God, we are home,